Hey, I really like bugs. Ever since I was a kid, I was really into like bugs and insects when I was really small. There was a bunch of woodlouse that used to live in our garden. They are my favorite woodlouse. They are my favorite bugs. Put down record. They're just so cool. But before I could say the word woodlouse because it's a really hard word when you're a stupid little dumb baby, you can't say the word woodlouse because there are a lot of weird syllables, right? So I would just say friends. I called them my friends, and I used to pick them up and used to roll them up into little balls, and I used to be really happy with them. And I didn't really understand that they probably didn't like being rolled up into balls, but I named them friends. Woodlouse have a ton of names though. They're called like bibblebugs, chiselhogs, monkey pea, and a monkey pea. I like chuggy pig. Chuggy pig's my favorite. It sounds like cheeky pig as well. They're my favorites. I love cheeky pig. It's like such a cute little nickname you can have for some sort of cheeky pig, but yeah. Crustaceans! Although not really bugs, I guess, but yeah, they're my favorite. They're the best. When I was a kid, I used to have these little, I guess the best way describing them is scissors, but they weren't quite like. They didn't cut things, but they were like this little clams, and on the end of it, it was like a hemisphere. Like, two hemispheres. So that when you would open up the scissors, imagine how you would open scissors. Instead of opening up two sharp blades, it will open up the sphere into two hemispheres that you can then close on top of a bug and catch it. This was like my favorite toy, and I would spend loads of time as a kid running around, and I used to have a little box, a little jar, sometimes a jar, sometimes a box. And what I do is I go into the woods and try and catch caterpillars, because I was really into them. I love watching them grow. And I remember I once spent, must have been about, I don't know, time's broken when you're a kid, but 10 minutes to an hour just running around my garden, chasing after this one blue bottle housefly. And I chased it for ages and ages and ages. And eventually I caught it. And I ran inside and my dad was talking to his friends. And I showed my dad's friends and he went, "Ah, poor fly." And I was just struck with guilt. It was like a truck had hit me of guilt. And I went outside and I released the fly. And it was like, I remember half of my brain was saying I did the right thing, and the other half of my brain was just pissed off I had to let go of this fly and spent so long trying to catch. But I released it. I hope that fly went on and lived a good life or got eaten and fed another animal that had a good life, and that animal may have gotten eaten. Psych of carbon. Anyway, I used to go and catch caterpillars using my little, I guess forceps, of course, that's the right word. There were these little scissors, the sphere scissors, right? I used to go and I used to catch these bugs, because I used to live in the middle of the countryside when I was very young, and used to catch these bugs. And I remember my kindergarten, we had a show and tell type thing where we had to bring in something that we've been working on in the week. Most people brought in toys, some people brought in pictures. I brought in a caterpillar that I caught in a box. It was like a little see-through jar I got and put this caterpillar in. And the teacher was so happy that I caught this caterpillar because they were just about to teach us about the life cycle. She asked me, "Hey Julius, is it okay if we can keep the caterpillar in this classroom?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, we can keep the caterpillar in the classroom." Yes, I was excited. I just loved the attention. I was like, "Fuck yeah, let's keep this caterpillar in the classroom. I love that." So I put it on the windowsill, and every day it would come in, and all the kids and me would run over to this windowsill, and we'd all check on the caterpillar, see how it was doing. And one day I came in, I was on my own when I came in. I walked in, and I walked over to the jar, and I saw that the caterpillar had gone and been replaced with this felty mess in the corner of the jar. And obviously we haven't gotten to the part of the life cycle where we learn about the chrysalis and cocoons. So I saw this and I started crying a lot because I thought this thing had just died. I thought it died and melted, and my teacher explained to me what a cocoon was, and my imagination was captured. My imagination was just gripped. Almost like I've been gripping the bags in my forceps. Is forceps the right word? Am I saying something bad? Hold on, let me turn on my computer real quick. I need to Google forceps because if I've been saying something bad this whole time. Forceps. Kind of the right word, I guess. Anyway, so my imagination was captured by what I've been told, that a caterpillar goes into a cocoon, it melts down, and then when it comes out as a butterfly. And I was just blown away. I thought they were two different bugs, so learning that they were just the same bug and that they could turn into each other like fucking Pokemon was the best thing I could have been told in my little 5-year-old, younger, actually 3-year-old brain. So so it became less of a thing of me just walking to class and checking on my caterpillar. Instead, I would wake up every day for kinder, rush out the door, run to kinder to check on this guy. I was the first one into class every time just to check on this caterpillar. And every day I come and walk in, I walk up to the jar, see how it was doing, see how the chrysalis was doing, and the chrysalis didn't change much, but I still invested in it. Less than a few weeks later, it felt like an eternity, but a few weeks later, I come in, and I guess I gotten bored of it at this point, because I wasn't the first one into the class this time. I was one of the last ones into the class. And all of the other kids had gathered around. They were all gathered around my jar, and when I walked in, they were like, Julius, come see this. And I walk over because I'm worried, because I'm thinking, oh no, something's gone wrong. Why are they all gathered? And the teacher says, look, Julius, look what's happened. It's what you've been waiting for. And I looked in the jar, and it was a fucking moth. And I was just pissed. I was like, what is this? What has his thing done with my chrysalis? And the teacher was like, no, it's not that. That's a caterpillar. And I was like, where's the butterfly? Not like there's the moth. The moth is the butterfly, my teacher said. And I said, that's not a butterfly, that is a moth. I'm scared of moths, I hate moths, I like butterflies, where's my butterfly? And the teacher was like, well, it's just a moth now, that's how it is. I was pissed, so I died. They were just like, what, do you want to let it go? And I was like, yeah. So all the kids went out into the playground and let it go. There was this big thing where they freed it and it flew away. And I just sat in the classroom and I was pissed off. I was annoyed that my caterpillar didn't turn into a butterfly. I was expecting to sit down with everyone and say, look, I got a butterfly. But instead it was just an ugly grey moth. Yeah, the moth laid eggs too, if I remember correctly, as it came out. Which doesn't really make sense. I think I might have been imagining some like moth poo as eggs, but I don't know whether I still got that memory in my head. But yeah. The area I grew up as a kid though was rich for moths. Moths? I mean bugs. The area was rich in bugs. I have loads of stories about just bugs and just crap. There was these things called cockchafers. Don't laugh, that's rude, it's their name. But there was this creature called a cockchafer, and there was these bugs, and the best way I can describe them is, if you ever seen a horsefly, just a big old fat horsefly, right? Mix that with a bumblebee, and you got a cockchafer. Google them. If you haven't seen them before, they are ugly as hell. They are ugly as hell, and they are sexually attracted to hair for some reason. And when it was cockchafer season, where I was growing up, where there was a cockchafer season, it used to be a no-go zone. Don't go outside. However, I didn't know it was cockchafer season. Well, for this season, and I was at the airstrip. This was before I gave up my passion of flying. But I was at the runway, and I remember we were having like a barbecue, and I was walking my cousin's dog. I just heard this deep rumbling sound, like it sounded like a hedge trimmer, but the problem was it was dusk, like we were in the middle of nowhere, and there were no gardens or anything, so there was no reason to hedge trim. And I was running through the grass with my cousin's dog, and I hear this buzz, and the dog comes back, running back to me. And the dog is just covered in these giant flies. These flies, consider them to be a little bit bigger than your thumb, alright? Just a little bit. Well, than my thumb. Maybe like double the size of a thumb, right? And they were huge. They were just embedded in my dog, just rolling around. And they have these little hooks on their legs, digging into hair. And I heard about these animals. So I got my dog and we ran. I do not want to get these, and I was too late because both directions where I could run to we now had this cloud of cockchafers, all mating. They come out of the ground for like a day, I think, to mate, and they were all mating, and they were all seeing my hair and my dog's hair, and they were going for us. And I managed to get back to the runway, and I had my hair just matted with these flies, and the dog was just covered in, and the dog was perfectly happy. She was just having a drink of water and she was dealing with it. But I was miserable. I was very unhappy, and we were wondering how we were going to get them out of my hair. We were going to have to cut off my hair. We were going to like do anything. So my dad proposed two options to me. We could either cut all my hair off, which I did not like the sound of, or we could leave them and wait for them to die, because once they finish fucking your hair, they die. And they release their sperm, they die. That's my two options. So I went with the wait for them to die, and it was not a nice experience. I had to sit there with the creatures just buzzing around in my hair for hours on end before they went. And the thing is, looking back on it, I still like those animals. I think they're cool as hell. I might be getting confused. I believe they're cockchafers, but if I'm completely wrong, if I got a completely wrong bug, please enlighten me in the comments. But yeah, that's my time with cockchafers. I had loads of other horror stories with bugs. It's almost like I remember all those horror stories to do with bugs ingrained themselves into my head, so I can always remember. I don't know, maybe it's like a evolutionary thing. If it's engraved into my head, I'm more likely to, be wary of this happening again next time. But the next one I have is that when we were making paper mache masks again in kinder, and again where I used to grow up in the middle of the farming area, there was basically, I went in one day when there was these paper mache masks were drying out, and I walk over into the classroom, and there's a giant spider caught on the paper mache masks, and everyone's too scared to get rid of it. Well, not everyone. I was one of the people that elected myself to get rid of the spider. So I took it out into the playground, and I got myself a little pencil, and I pushed it, and the spider bit the pencil. I never seen a spider use its mandibles before, but it did, and it bit the pencil, and I couldn't pull it back. So I know. That's the most pointless story I ever told, but there you go. That was the time I almost got my finger bitten off by a spider, I guess. It's far more dramatic. Anyway, as I grew up, I'm still interested in bugs, a lot, and I recently got involved in closed ecosystems, just during the end of quarantine. I guess February to now I've been doing it the most. I was watching YouTube videos of these people who collect, sort of like, they basically just scrummage, they rummage. They collect bits of outdoor material, detritus, wood, plants, moss, dirt, bit of gravel, and they create these little jars and then seal up the jar for months and months, and they document its process. Now, a lot of these jars fail in the first week, much like a restaurant failed the first week. But some of these jars continue on for months, and you can have this perfectly working ecosystem that has been completely detached from the outside world for years at times. I was reading this one story of a gentleman who had his jar for 50 years. It was just moss and like water leaves at this point, but it was still a jar that had its own water cycle. It had its own ecosystem. It had its own bacteria. It photosynthesized. It was just incredible. And that was, again, my imagination was captured, much like when I was a child being taught about cocoons. So I decided I was going to get myself a big old pack of jars and go out and make my own little closed ecosystem, because why not? I've got nothing else to do, so I may as well try it out. So the first one I made was a woodland one. Now, I have a little foresty area behind my house that I decided to use. So I went out there with my jar, and I overturned some logs, and I picked up some friends, some woodlouse, and put them in the jar. I found a few centipedes and threw them in as well. Centipedes are awesome, by the way. I think I've only, as I grown up, I started to realize how badass centipedes are. They're so fun to watch. I sat there, and I just watched the centipede move for ages, and it was cool. It was so cool. I caught 3 of them, and I put them in a jar, so there's a predator. we have a predator now in the jar, so we need some prey. Oh, I found a spider, but I didn't put it in because I don't think anything that was coming out of the jar was going to be worth it for a spider. So I got some woodlouse, which I don't think could serve as prey for centipedes. But hey, the centipedes were still alive when I let them go. I must have done something right. I put in some wood for the woodlouse, like some rotting wood. I put in some leaves, some moss. I put in a little layer of gravel on the bottom as a sediment layer, and then above it I put the soil. It's got a word. The substrate on top of it. The substrate. I wet it slightly so that it could begin a water cycle. Put some moss there which also had some water, and there we go. And then I sealed the jar, and it sealed that day. A lot of the woodlouse had died, and I also caught a snail and put it in there, which also died. That's a problem, I believe, because the snail, as it rots, I think it releases ammonia, which could end up killing all the other animals. But hey ho, it was a bit of a mess. The jar looks awful now. It's all rotted and gross. The woodlouse that were alive were loving it, and some of the centipedes was just living below the soil substrate. But the woodlouse that were alive are loving the rotting wood, and they're having a great time. I basically just made a banquet hall for woodlouse, essentially. But yeah, that jar, I tipped it away as soon as it ran its course. I thought because it's not very good. But this led on to my second jar, which is my second jar, which was absolutely phenomenal. I did everything right. And I'm going to run you through how I did it so that you can go and do one yourself. So first thing I did was I brought a 5-liter jar off of Amazon. You don't need a 5-liter. You can do as small as a Tic Tac container. You can do 2 liters. You can do 1-liter water bottle. Basically, as long as it's really easy to see into it. And it's like a nice neutral. So plastic, I guess, but a nice neutral hard surface. So maybe a water bottle isn't the best idea, but like a Tic Tac container could work. Glass is the obvious option, Hard plastics are very good. You want to get one like this. Go down to a local freshwater area. It could be anywhere, as long as it's freshwater, and it's got life in it, and you can do a puddle with. That'll be really interesting. But look for lakes and rivers are your best bet, because the stiller the water is the better, I say. And what you want to do is you want to go down into the water as close as you can get, and as far away from the shore bank as you can go. Get down on your knees and just scoop up some sludge. Just grab some sludge. You don't have to use your hands, obviously. I did because I'm a fucking little filthy teen. But you can use whatever you want. Just pick up some sludge, pop it in a jar, get a nice ground layer of the sludge going, and then you want to get another container, a cup or something, and just scoop up some of the same river water and pop it in the jar. Put the lid on the jar, completely seal it, and there you go. You made a closed ecosystem. That was what I did for my second one, and it's still alive today, I think. Although I left it at my old house, but it was absolutely phenomenal to watch. I'll tell you some of the creatures I got in there because they're amazing. I spent so many hours watching this jar. I used to catalog almost everything that's living there, and there's a lot. I'm never drinking river water again. I'm never even opening my mouth while swimming anymore after seeing how much crap there is just swimming around in the water. So I started off with a lot of these larvae. They were bouncing around and were swimming about, and I immediately worried about this because larvae don't hatch into waterborne creatures. They will normally hatch into mosquitoes and gnats, which is what they didn't do. But unfortunately, I sealed this jar properly with sealant, so I couldn't get them out. So this died, unfortunately. I think it was about 3 or 4 that made it out of the larval stage that ended up dying in the jar. But they ended up feeding the other creatures. There were about 4 water snails, one of which Big Bertha, I named her. It's a huge snail, and I mean huge. She walks along the edge of the glass eating the algae, so she's pretty much my only way I get to see my jar now. Well, is with Big Bertha eating the algae on the glass, which is phenomenal, I think it's great. There's a couple of smaller snails that are sort of vibing around. They tend to stick to the bottom, they tend to hang on the twigs. I put a few assorted twigs in there just to make it look nice. Well, because it actually made it look nice. Nice. The next is these little water beetles. Now these guys were quick. Whenever I shine a light in the jar, I think they are afraid of light. They swim away super quickly, but when you see them, they're incredible to watch. There are these little shiny black beetles, and they dig around in mud and the muck at the bottom, and they bury themselves away from the light one, and they're super interesting. Well, the next one's kind of weird. The next one I found is these little earwig type creatures. They're not earwigs, but they're waterborne. So I'm not entirely sure what they are, but they're awesome. They kind of just hang around the twigs, much like the snails. They're a bit more proactive than the snails, though. They tend to swim away if the water gets josted at all. And finally, the most prolific member of my jar are the water boatmen. I think they're called back paddlers in America. I was talking about this like with Boys of Christian. I think they're called back paddlers or something, and they're brilliant. They are absolutely amazing. I love them. And when I say they're the most prolific creature in my jar, I mean it a lot. I'm sorry, I'm not putting my words together well today. I only just woke up and I've started recording this. There are a fuck ton of them though. They're mainly in the larval stage. They just swim around, they float about, and they're very, very sensitive to the light. Whenever I shine my light on them, they all flock to the edge of the jar that the light is being shone on. And they love it, and I love them. They're really fun to watch. They float about, and they really fill out the jar a lot, and it's really interesting to watch them. If you're going to go down to the water and you do this yourself, and do this closed ecosystem thing yourself, try to go down around this time of the year when you're going to get a lot of these guys, because they really do make this entire thing look incredibly interesting. So yeah, this is why I recommend you can go to a closed ecosystem. I mean, mine was perfectly successful. So yeah. Some honourable mentions for creatures in my freshwater jar. There's these little white worm things, and they look like little flecks of fur. I identified them a while ago, and I think they're called detritus worms. I identified them on FishKeep before. I mean, like a full of people that keep freshwater fish, and everything on it was like, you need to get rid of these. They're really dangerous. They can carry bacteria. They're really bad for the pH level of the water. And at first, because I wasn't very knowledgeable on closed ecosystems, I was worried. I was thinking, oh god, are these things going to kill all my ecosystem? But it turns out the water I was having is so much full of algae and so murky that they're actually a really important part of the ecosystem. The algae in the water filters out the ammonia and turns it into nitrate, I believe so. Some biologist is going to correct me. I failed biology at primary school. So yeah. They filter out the ammonia into nitrate, and then these detritus worms are actually part of the creatures that ingest the nitrate, and it's harmful to them. They die from this nitrate ingestion. But at the same time, they come away from it, having taken it out of the system and turning it back into carbon, which then turns it back into ammonia, which then the algae eats again. How cool is that? They're a huge part of the ecosystem in my little jar, but they're actually a pest in freshwater fish jar. Some tips I have for you if you're planning on making a freshwater jar, which I heartily encourage you to do, make a freshwater jar. Some tips I have. Number 1, place it in a sunny area that doesn't get too much heat, so you want the sun to be able to hit it so that the algae can photosynthesize, but you don't want to have it like too hot, otherwise it can raise the temperature in the water and kill off some of the animals inside. So make sure when you place it, you're placing it on like a nice dim windowsill where it's going to get a little bit of sun, just enough for synthesizing, but not enough that you're actually going to damage the ecosystem inside your jar. Some other tips I have for you. Make sure you keep it small. I had a few snails in mine, but I wouldn't encourage it. Snails carry a lot of ammonia when they die, and you can upset the balance of chemicals in the water if something big like that dies. Same goes for frogs, fish. Leave them out in the wild, so they don't need to be put into a jar. Those kind of animals, especially the fish. Another type, try and get as little pollution as you can. This is why I recommend that you go as far away from the shore bank as possible. The bank of rivers and lakes tend to have a lot of pollution built up due to the amount of grass and twigs that are laying in the water. So if you go deeper into the body of water, you can make sure you stay away from pollution and you get more clean. Also, people are less likely to launch their scrapes into the middle of the river. They're more likely to just let it drop onto the bank. So yeah, you're just less likely to get pollution. For instance, I got a peanut shell in my first fresh water jar, which it's a little bit upsetting. And my next tip for you is if you have enough money to buy multiple jars, make sure you get multiple of the same type of ecosystem. You'll be surprised how much different each ecosystem is, and how much it differs from between like ecosystem 1, ecosystem 2, ecosystem 3. Although they're the same type of jar, they turn out to be really different. It's phenomenal. It's monumental how much changes, and I hardly recommend you give multiple ones a go. So you can see, for instance, I made another ecosystem where I learned more about how to maintain these. So I had a substrate layer and stuff, and one of the things I noticed was that in my second one, it's a lot clearer looking. The algae tends to settle on the rocks, and I placed it on the bottom, leaving the water itself very, very clear. Much clearer than my first one, which was literally I just scooped some water out. Very interesting stuff, very interesting. The next one I tried after my freshwater one was the saltwater one. This took 2 attempts because I'm a fool. I went down to Brighton Beach on the first one with my jar, and it was a very clear day. I went down at low tide, and it was a super still, super clear looking day. So I walked down to the beach, and there was nothing. The shore was just covered in just sand and maybe a couple dead bits of seaweed, a couple bits of pollution, or some broken glass, a couple syringes, how it's like on the beach. But just a bunch of stuff, just junk, right? Well, but nothing natural had washed up for shore. So I was getting a bit worried, because I was thinking, well, maybe Australia isn't the best place to get this and get this closed ecosystem material from. So I left it alone. My dad drove me home, a bit dejected, until I found someone who lives in the same suburb as me in Donvale, who had made a saltwater ecosystem. And I emailed him and asked him for some advice. And his advice was to wait for a really, really stormy day. So I did. I waited for a very, very stormy day, and it came sometime in February, March, during like the end of summer. And I went down to the beach in the middle of the pouring rain. It was super windy, like gale wind. It was really rainy, and I went down at low tide, which was about 11 p.m. that day, got down to the beach, and it was just covered with seaweed. And each bit of seaweed had these like little tiny crabs in them. It's amazing. It's absolutely phenomenal. I basically was just like a kid in a candy store. I was walking around on the beach. There was no one else there in the middle of the night. Windy, rainy, I had my coat on, I had my jar. I walked around and just picked up so much seaweed and so much of like this stuff that's been washed up on shore that was going to die. And essentially, it was a really nice feeling that I rescued it. Because when you take stuff out of the river, you're not harming the creatures that you're putting into your jar, but you're definitely not saving them. With these creatures that were washing up on the beach, it really felt like you were doing a service, because I know that these creatures would end up eaten by seagulls, or in like the next morning, and be rolled around them by dogs. My cousin's dog used to do that all the time. So the next thing I knew was water. Once I had these little crabs and stuff, I scooped up some sand, but then I needed to get water. Now the issue was, I didn't want to catch water that was from the shore, so I didn't bring my Wellington boots at the time, so I rolled up my jeans. I took off my socks and shoes, and I waited in the middle of the storm into the sea, and I just scooped up a ton of water and popped it in the jar. I brought it home and waited for all the sand and stuff to settle, and I just had like a assortment of really interesting creatures. Some crustaceans, a lot of crustaceans, actually mainly crustaceans. But we have a couple of little floating like larvae, a couple little see-through sort of translucent looking bugs for swimming around this really beautiful iridescent bug. I haven't identified yet, but it was this really iridescent. It was like this iridescent rainbow colored bug. Yeah, it also leaked like rainbow blood when something there was like this little twig stuck into it, and it was like, I swear the water just turned like a little tint of rainbow. So like, yeah, it was really cool. I really want to identify this bug, but I threw out the saltwater ecosystems. I don't know. It's like swimming around on the bottom. It's got a little fantail, and it's amazing. If you live near the sea, saltwater is harder to maintain. My first system from saltwater actually died, but if you can and you know how to do it, you can get your hands on saltwater ecosystem. Definitely give it a go. It's so recommended. I absolutely love it. If you may, let me round off back where we started. Woodlouse. I had a bit of an issue with my initial stock of woodlouse when I moved into my new house in Taipei. When I moved into my house that I'm living in Taiwan, there were a ton of woodlouse just living everywhere. The house had been left completely, basically like left uninhabited for so long. It would have gained like such a damp that woodlouse has started to make their way into basement rooms. But the house itself, the basement was just covered in woodlouse and flies, and it was just awful, like so awful. So I went online and I was like, how to get rid of the flies. Now that one's interesting because flies are actually bad for your health as humans. They're really, really detrimental to your health if you live with them. So we needed to get them out ASAP. And I would love to have just left the window open and let them go, but they wouldn't leave, so we need to kill them. So we ordered this like raid spray. I don't even use raid, but oh my god, it works. Like this pesticide, holy crap. I googled it, and it's like a neurotoxin. So what it does essentially is it attacks the brain of these flies, but I would spray it in the room, spray a ton of it with like a rag over my face, spray it in the room, walk out, shut the door, you come back in, and it's empty. It's just clean. There's just dead flies everywhere. A bit morbid, I'm sorry if you like flies, but it was a really interesting thing. I never tried it before. And there we go. That's how I got rid of my flies. The woodlouse, that were a different story. Woodlouse are my friends. I really, really like woodlouse. And like I told you at the beginning of the video, I would never hurt a woodlouse. I would feel awful. Like it's just like a principle of mine that wouldn't hurt woodlouse even if they are living in the house. And loads of people are telling me how they're really bad for you and you need to get them out. That would be healthy because I've slept a few nights with the house polluted with woodlouse because I just don't mind it. They weren't going to get out to my bed. They were mostly hanging out in those corners of the room. So I figured out, until I know how to get rid of them, I'm going to live with them for a bit. And all my friends were like, no, you can't do that. You gotta like spray them. You gotta throw them out. You gotta crunch them. And I was like, I don't want to. I just didn't want to. So I spoke with one of my friends who's actually really invested in insects. I don't remember what degree he has, but he's in a type of biology, I don't know. I don't think it's microbiology. It's study of bugs and insectology. I'm sure something like that. And I spoke to him about woodlouse, and his answer was brilliant because it was exactly what I wanted to hear, which is if you have woodlouse in your house, chances are you got yourself some rot going on, which is a bad sign. However, because we just moved in and we checked the house and there was no rot, it was completely fine. He said most likely the woodlouse just came in because it was a bit damp and cold. And he said that luckily for you, woodlouse like the opposite things that humans like. So your woodlouse will love the damp and cold, and they'll be attracted to things that are rotting. Humans, however, they like the warm and dry, and they tend to get rid of things that are rotting, he said. So Julius, he said, what you decide to do of just leaving them in the room is probably the best bet. If you just live in your room for a bit, they'll leave because they'll know it's just not a place to rot. So I said, okay. So I basically went around and I cleared out some of the rot. Basically, the basement that I lived in has a little pocket area, like a little window looking out to the outside. There's a little pocket area, and in that pocket area, a bunch of leaves are built up. And I figured that was where the woodlouse were. So I scooped up the leaves nice and gently, and I put them in the garden to go and rot in a nice pile. I kept them away from the sight of bird, and I put the leaves there. It was like a fucking exodus. There was a period of time for like a few hours where if you sat down and look out the window, it's just thousands of woodlouse just climbing up the walls, and they were leaving. They was done. They were just done. And he was right. My friend was right. The woodlouse just left. And from that day, and I mean this, woodlouse are bros. They're just bros. I spoke to them. They're not bad for your health. This was brought to you by woodlouse. They're not bad for your health. They don't get in the way because they tend to only look for damp and cold places. So if you like them warm and dry, which if you're a human, you probably do, they will leave you alone. They're bros. They're bros. Next time you're walking around and you see a woodlouse, don't think that's a woodlouse, that's a pest, that's an insect. Think that's a friend. Think it's a friend because they are friends. They're just here to look after you. They're not here to look after you, but they want to keep out. They want to keep out of your way. They don't want to get in your way. They don't want to upset you.